Welcome everyone. Here's a special treat for us today. This is a Hamilton Model 23 chronograph. So that feature has the additional stopwatch hand, a long hand you can see at the top, and there's a minute counter wheel as well. And this is a World War II military spec chronograph. They were used principally by the US Air Force, which is where this one originates. They were used along with octants, so the navigator could time precisely their measurement against a star, and this would enable them to get a very accurate location so they could go hunting. Unfortunately, like our U-boat, this one is broken, getting a very scraunchy wind, and it's missing, and even then I can't get the crown to start up the watch or the chronograph. How amazing is that? Beautiful chronograph. Unfortunately, with the complexity, we won't have time today to go through detailed explanations of these functions, but I'll give some commentary as we go along. I have access to some old archive materials. This watch was issued January the 11th, 1945 to the US Air Force. Just want to try this balance here because I think there's too much movement. Yeah, that's loose. Need to look at that. How about trying to see if we can just get some action out of it? Ah, alright. Well, it started up. It's not running great, however. As soon as I hit the chronograph, it stops. Okay, let's get this decased and have a closer look. This is quite a complex movement, so in the interest of time I will speed some of these sections up for us. Just need to remove this crown. It should allow me to drop the movement out of the front, so I'm just going to remove this bezel and the hands. I'm just using these delicate tweezers called Delran as the product so that I don't scratch the dial. And the plastic, of course, is protecting the dial as I remove these hands as well. A bit tricky sometimes to get underneath them. There we go. Okay, let's see if we can get this movement out. I've got to be careful of that chronograph stem there. I see two dial screws, which should allow us to drop this dial out. Lovely. We'll put that away for safekeeping, and this allows us to start work on the dial side. And remove the hour wheel first of all. Oh, I see that minute wheel is actually raised up. Do you see that? It wasn't engaged with a cannon pinion. Well, that comes out next. We'll use this vintage cannon pinion remover. It's friction fit, so this special tool will make short work of it. There we go. I'm going to start work on these spring bars on the chronograph. I'm just holding these in place because they are loaded, and I want to make sure we don't lose them. And also the screws, I'm going to put these back into their respective hole locations. That way I won't get confused, hopefully. This is a return spring for that operating lever. And that's working against the pillar wheel, and it allows that pillar wheel to come around one notch at a time, and this spring just lets the lever slot into each of those gaps. Just need to undo this on a reverse thread, given it has the 3 marks across the top of the head there. And this is this operating lever here. And you can see how that drags around that pillar wheel. Well, we're getting there. This is the last of the mainsprings. We've got a smaller one to take care of. This one just here is operating against our minute counter wheel. I should be able to remove the flyback hammer. This resets those wheels, the minute wheel and the chronograph wheel, the chronograph runner. I have to be careful here not to undo the wrong screws. Some of these are not screws at all, but eccentrics, kind of like a post that sets up the angles on these gears, and I don't want to move them. I'm just going to dismantle this, and hopefully we can pull this off the post. Oh, let's come from the other side. See if I can lift this. Yeah. You see that? Yeah, there's a number of those on this bridge plate here for the chronograph. Here, here, and here. I'm going to remove now this bridge for the minute counter and also the chronograph. I suppose that's really still a cock, isn't it, with the single screw holding it in, but it's actually got 2 jewels in it. You can see here the cams on the top of these wheels for resetting, and also the counters underneath. Very delicate parts. Well, it's quite a complex movement, isn't it, with a chronograph feature on it here. All of these poles, I believe they're called, engage with that wheel, that pillar wheel. And they each have a spring return tensioner as well. Okay, well, let's take this pillar wheel out. And we can start undoing this cock here, which is a double wheel for our trainer wheels. And that's the drive for the chronograph. Now I had a little bit of trouble here understanding in our forest of screws here which ones to undo. Some of them have rings around them, but then this one here didn't, so, but wait a minute, I've got an idea. Yes, it was sunk down and I couldn't see that. So those are the 4 I need to take out, and we should be able to remove this bridge hopefully. I think I can slide it out from underneath that wheel. Just need to be careful. Will it come out? Yep. And there we have it, our train of wheels. The mainspring delivers energy through these wheels for the various operations of the watch. And this one has this extra gear on top here for delivering power to the chronograph. Also take out the mainspring and mainspring barrel here. We'll open that up later and have a look inside and see what condition the mainspring is in. There's the winding gear and clutch out. And this is over the escape wheel. Now I'm going to leave the balance, which is probably the most delicate part on the watch, in the plate, and it's going to be safer there for cleaning. But let's just check to see. Yeah, there's way too much movement there. There's something wrong with that balance for sure, and we'll have a look at that in a little bit. But I want to finish the main plate here so that we can get it into the cleaner along with the other parts. So we'll go back on the dial side, and we'll take this plate off. That's just holding our yoke, the long bar in place, and the yoke spring here. I'm just holding it down carefully so it doesn't spring away. Come on, work with me. Yeah. And these wheels, we should be able to just get these out. Probably a little bit of Rodico putty here just to help me get these ones. The setting lever has a small post underneath that slots into the crown stem, and when we pull the crown in and out, it changes the setting from winding to setting the hands on our watch. And that's it. We've got our base plate stripped and we can inspect our jewels. And I expect to see dirt, hopefully no cracks or chips. So we'll get this into our cleaning basket. And load up our first set of parts. I'm using this ancient 1930s, 40s L&R watch cleaner. It's nice that you can still find these. And in my first jar here we have the cleaning fluid. And we'll give that a good spin for 10-15 minutes. And then at the end of that, we can take it out and spin dry it before it goes into the next jar for rinsing, and then a secondary rinse which I'm just pushing back there before it finishes in the heater. And this is our first batch, looking spiffy. That gives me a chance to just inspect these parts and make sure that everything is in good shape. And look at our main plate. I was having a good close look at the mesh and I thought I saw water, a drop of water at the bottom, but oh dear. See this? It's a jewel. A jewel has come off our movement, unfortunately. I'll get a size on it and hopefully we can identify where it came from. So it's a 130 or 1.3 millimeters. Oh no, we've got a serious problem here. Do you see that under the main bridge? I'm seeing a ton of debris here, and these are metal flakes. You see that? This gear has been completely chewed up. This is our winding gear, and I need to find out what the cause of this is and get it fixed. I think I found it. Look at this. This is the winding pinion, and it's almost toothless. I think there's 5 teeth left on this. Those are write-offs. We're going to need to get those replaced and all of this cleaned up. That certainly explains our scraunchy winding and why the gears were missing. Yeah, and just look at the mess under there. It's a rusty ring of debris. Well, we'll get our clicker and click spring out. It sits underneath on this plate or bridge. I just need to be a little careful with this spring. And then we can get these intermediate wheels out. One is a reverse thread and one is a standard thread, so they actually operate against each other, and I'll hold this one so that I can undo it. And the last item on the bridge plate here is this spring bar for our chronograph. And it just keeps upwards tension on the chronograph timer. Okay, I'm going to take out this balance. I'm going to have a good look at it. And we will need to oil those jewels and pull this apart in any case. But we'll leave it just here for safekeeping for now. And I need to look at that balance staff too. In hindsight, I probably should have removed the bridge for the pallet fork and the pallet fork itself, but it'll be fine. We'll just get these taken care of. They've had the pleasure of getting cleaned at the same time as the balance. And this is our pallet fork. The jewels look good. I just want to see if I can work out where that jewel came from that was missing. I have a suspect right here. And this is at the bottom of the balance staff on our balance. And there's a hole jewel, which we're looking at. But there should be a cap jewel covering this. I'm just going to size this up. Yeah, 130 fits in there almost perfectly. This is definitely the chief suspect. But what's happened here? We've got a chip from our jewel. I think we have more damage than I expected. We'll get these out. Could explain why there was so much movement on the balance wheel. But we'll also inspect the top pair of jewels here as well. The balance staff itself is actually looking pretty decent. It needs a clean. There's some old oils there, but the jewels themselves look okay. We'll just get the regulator separated here and make sure these screws are put in the right place. They're different designs. Our wheels came out of the cleaner and they're looking fabulous. Just inspect the pinions very carefully and also make sure that our gears are in good shape. And so far so good. Yeah, I think I'm... Oh, wait a minute, what's that on the escape wheel? Oh, just a little bit of dirt. Okay. Alright, let's get into our mainspring barrel and see what condition this mainspring is in. We have to be careful here and take the arbor out in the center first of all. And the mainsprings are under a lot of tension, so just want to feed them out very carefully, side to side. Otherwise this will fly across the room. It's an old style spring, blue steel, but it looks in good condition. So I've cleaned it up and we'll put a very fine layer of oil onto it and we'll reuse this one. I'll get this loaded up into our mainspring winder. This is another vintage tool and a bit larger for doing pocket watches. On a standard watch it will be for a smaller diameter. We'll get this wound into the barrel. I'm going to leave the tail just outside. So we can position that correctly. And oh, nearly lost that. There it is. Just need to get this arbor catch put back in place correctly so that it's caught into the hole at the end of the spring. We can get our barrel closed and put away. So let's have a look at this dial. I don't want to do too much work to this. It has that matte black finish to it, but we'll give it a little bit of a clean up. And a quick rinse and a dry. And that should be good. Let's check out the damage. We have the balance staff coming through this jewel right here, and that was badly chipped on this side. Actually, it's got its integrity on the other side, but I think we're going to need to punch this jewel out and replace it. That's the whole jewel. And then on top of that we had this plate here, and this cap jewel or end stone was fitted in here and was loose. I did check the material here to see if we had a potential of replacing that jewel, but there's really not enough material in there that would make me comfortable that we can secure that. So I think we're going to have to replace this part here with the jewel completely. And we had this winding pinion with its missing teeth. I think there's only 4 or 5 teeth left on there. And had shards everywhere inside the movement, so this all needed to be double cleaned. And this had chewed up on this winding gear here, so that wore this gear out completely as well. Both of these, I think, are write-offs. I can't recover them. They're going to need to be replaced. Then we had this sweep chronograph second hand that's bent. I think that should be an easy fix. I'm hoping that we can recover this hand and reuse it. I did notice a little bit of flaking on the paint on some of the other hands, so we do need to be a bit careful when we do that. And then lastly here, I'd seen that we'd had some wear on the crystal, and it had started working on this already, but I want to see if we can recover that and potentially reuse it. If not, then we will need to replace the crystal. I think the watch would be deserving of that. So that's it. We just need to get these taken care of and we can start putting our watch back together. Let's start with that crystal. We can pop it out of the bezel, and I'm going to wet sand it. I've actually started with a 2000 grade and I'm up to 5000 now. We'll take this up to 7000, and even then it still leaves a bit of a scuff on the crystal surface, so we'll finish off with this polish. After about 4 or 5 minutes, look at that, it's almost as new. But I did notice this crystal had been glued in, which is not unusual, but unfortunately this glue had turned to this green gunge here, so I'm going to get rid of all of this and finish off with some pegwood. And we'll use a crystal press, and that lets us put pressure down onto the crystal and increase the concaveness, if that's a word. It will allow us to snap the crystal back into place on the bezel. And there it is. Very nice. Let's take a look at this chronograph hand. I'm just going to use a pair of tweezers here, just to straighten this out a little bit. And I think I will need to look at the other hands as well with the paint chipping. We'll use a jeweler tool here to punch out that jewel from the base plate. Now I want to get the right size here so that we'll take out not just the jewel but also the brass setting as well. So this 160 will work well for us. And look, here's the new replacement. And look at the difference in the jewel size. No wonder we had an issue with our balance wheel. So we'll get this new one set in place. Unfortunately, I forgot to take a micrometer measurement for the depth, so we may just need to double check there that the balance works fine. And here's our replacement end stone or cap jewel for the other side. Just oil these up and we can put this back together. And this pair here, it's the same oil, very fine oil called a train oil or Mobius 9010. And I just want to fill the jewels here about 2/3 full. And we can get our regulator replaced, remembering those screws. We'll just set this about halfway for now and make some finer adjustments later on. I do want to check this balance wheel. I think that it's not, yeah, it's a little too tight, definitely too tight, so I didn't have the jewel depth right. So we'll make a fine adjustment here. I'm at 62 and we'll go to 66, so 4 1/100ths. I was happy with that, so this balance can go back together. Just need to be careful when we do the stud screw up here, not to slip and damage the hairspring. And with that we can get back to our base plate and start rebuilding it. We'll do the setting lever. And carry on with our yoke. Well, this had a yoke spring, and again there's quite a bit of tension on this spring, so we need to be careful and get the cover plate on as quickly as possible. So we'll get these intermediate wheels in place. I think we need to do that minute wheel as well. Yeah, a little bit of a clean up. And we'll get the cover plate back, and as soon as this is screwed down, I'll feel more comfortable. That spring is protected. And this keeps our gears in place as well, and the setting lever too. Okay, let's take a look at that winding pinion. I found a new one. Look at the difference. So we'll get that in place. Next, I'm going to put the winding stem in to the watch, and this will just catch that pinion gear. Otherwise it would drop straight through the faceplate. And also the next gear, which is the clutch right here. While we continue the rebuild, I wanted to share a little bit of a history about the watch, or at least what I found out. The lady who sold this to me at the auction had shared with me it was her grandfather's, and her grandfather was in the US Army, and he had a friend who was in the Air Force, and it was his friend's watch. His friend had left it with him to be looked after while he was away. So her grandfather had kept this watch in safekeeping, expecting the return of his friend. And unfortunately, his friend never returned. And he was a watchmaker himself, and to de-stress would service this watch. And she remembers the last time he serviced it. She was 10 years old, and she was fascinated by the process, and hopefully this brings back some memories. Well, now she told me that she's 51 years old, so this watch was last serviced 41 years ago. Well, let's hope that we can bring it back into all its glory. Now, these two intermediate wheels are reverse thread and standard thread, so with two screwdrivers here I should just be able to tighten them up against each other. And we'll use our new winding wheel, get rid of that old one, as well as that annoying hair on my oiler. Yes, I did spot it. After cleaning all those shards away, I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on these shoulders here, and we can put the retaining cap back. That should just drop into place, but it's not quite right. Do you see that? Let me try just putting these screws back. At least I'll start them, and hopefully this will help us just line things up a little bit better. If I can just get this screw to behave. Oh, no, it wants to misbehave. Did you see that? Quick fix. The many uses of Rodico. Well, it's still not lining up. It's like it's jammed, and I don't see why. Let's turn this plate over and have a look. I'm going to loosen this up and see if we can find out what's going on here. Ah, I see it straight away. Look, this screw here that's right through the plate was one of our retaining spring screws, and of course I screwed it all the way down. We'll need to loosen that, and sure enough, that was the fix. There's always an answer when you look carefully enough. This is our click spring and clicker going back in. And usually on the underside of this bridge plate. Oh, I may have been a bit generous there with the grease, but we'll clean that up a little bit later. I'm putting a slightly lighter grease onto the main spring barrel and also the center wheel here. This is called D5. And we should be able to put this bridge plate back. Just need to locate it underneath this wheel. Hopefully it will just drop into place. Yep. Excellent. Well, it was easy to remember which screws we needed to put this bridge plate back. The ones with the rings around them. And I can get this double fourth wheel cock back in place. It's not quite lining up on the gear. Let's just make sure the staff is through the jewel. Definitely don't want to tighten those down until that's the case. And test as you go along. Get our escape wheel in place. Tricky. And this also had its own jewel cock as well. That went in much easier. But we'll check again. Just a good habit to get into before we tighten any of these down. That's the easiest way to break a jewel. You know, pallet fork and pallet fork bridge. And I do put a jewel grease onto this pallet fork as well, which needs to load up the escape wheel. Very difficult to film that though. We'll just make sure that this is lined up too. And now we can put some wind onto the mainspring. That pallet fork is just holding the escape wheel in place, and as soon as we move it, you get this nice click. And here it is, the big moment. Do we have life again? Oh, she wants to go. Yep. So, yes. That's fantastic. Just check that everything is good. And we can start rebuilding this chronograph plate. Just a little grease for this pillar wheel. And I'll put it around the shoulders on the inside carefully. And just the gear edge at the bottom there. I won't put anything onto the pillars themselves. Just a little bit here. That could be a little bit too much. We'll clean this up. And we'll continue the build. These springs had those plates or risers underneath them as well, so you can make sure that they go in correctly. And they look almost identical. They might be identical, these springs. This is a sliding gear. And I'll put this down on the post, but I also need to just locate that spring underneath to go around the other post. So we'll just hold this down and set that. And I can put our sliding gear in place on the other post. And we'll just get the spring underneath. That's an easier thing to do. Clean up a little bit. We can rebuild our chronograph runner. Just gently making sure these line up correctly. And we'll just check that the pivots are in the jewels. Oh, slight adjustment on this one. That's it. I'm going to oil this jewel before we put the next part in. I won't have good access to it after this. This is a coupling wheel. It's picking up power from that secondary fourth wheel. And this has its own bridge mechanism, the coupling bridge. And I'll just apply a little grease on this eccentric for our hammer. This minute recording jumper has a profiled end to the spring, and that gives us a nice smooth change on the minute counter. This is our hammer return spring, and I just need to hold it down to set it. I want to rebuild our operating lever, but we have a problem. Look at that, completely magnetized. We're going to need to demagnetize these parts before we continue. And I think also the whole movement has somehow got magnetized over time. Much better. Now This just needs to engage the pillar wheel. Now we can return the column wheel jumper. It is spring loaded, so I just need to put some tension onto that so that we can set the pins. I'll just move the operating lever into position, and then we can return the operating lever spring. We're getting very close now. Just need to return this last spring for our coupling clutch. And we should be able to test out, hopefully, our chronograph. Oh, wait, there's something wrong here. Why is there no tension on this? When I press the chronograph button, nothing. I've forgotten something. Here it is. I forgot to set the return spring on that operating lever. Perfect. Before oiling the jewels, I just want to check the operation of this minute counter. Great. Okay, we'll apply a train oil. Mobius 9010. And we don't want too much. And I've left the pallet fork jewel dry. This is a HP 1300 or D5 for our center wheel. And we could try it out. Let's check the timekeeping on this. Oh, okay. Well, we've got some work to do here. Very low rate, and amplitude is marginal at 200. And we need to remove the beat error and get that down to around 1 millisecond or less. I think I found the problem. Our hairspring here is sitting on the arm of the balance wheel, so we need to make a few adjustments. And after tweaking everything up, look at that, within a few seconds per day, very healthy amplitude and a beat error of less than 1 millisecond. Let's also check the dial-up position. A little bit of a loss in amplitude, but excellent results. I'm pleased with that. So we'll get our cannon pinion back in place and finish up on the dial side. Just need to set this correctly against the minute wheel and add a little D5 here, return our hour wheel, and on goes the dial. It's got this lovely patina to it. Before we put our hands back, I want to look at this flaking, especially on the hour hands. So we're mixing up some enamel here. And we'll just apply this gently and run it along the hour hand. And let that enamel dry overnight. And now we can return our hands. And I want to set these carefully so that they don't interfere with each other, so I'm just checking to make sure that that's the case. And with our chronograph reset, I want to line this up exactly on 60. And we'll just check the operation. We should be able to do a stop and a reset. And this is our minute counter. Again, with everything reset to 0, I can line this up exactly on the 30 mark. That counts 30 minutes. In our last hand, which is our second hand. Everything seems to be working well, so it's time to recase this movement. I'll put the bezel on the front here so that we can turn it over and get those case screws back. And I'll just line it up carefully with the crown and crown stem, and that will set these screws in the right place. Let's enjoy one final look at this beautiful chronograph movement before we return the case back. And what would be a more fitting backdrop than a vintage sextant to rest our Hamilton pocket watch on. Just check the minute counter operation. Lovely. Well, with that we've come to the end of our journey, restoring this Hamilton Model 23 chronograph. Thank you for joining me, and I'll leave you to enjoy it. Until next time.